an original CBS Reports documentary. The battle to defund the police.
I do see the good in what policing is, but we have to work to get the bad out of it.
Another person get brutalized by the police. How can you block that out?
Hey, hey, these crazy crowds have got to go.
Because everyone doesn't do what they're supposed to do. So to say you don't need police officers, okay, I think we do. We do in my neighborhood.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it. Drew Barrymore.
Hi, guys.
Mira Sorvino.
Kristen Bell, baby.
Miss Lopez and Mr. Maluma are Reggie.
CBS mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Is this a date or are we just friends?
CBS mornings, starting at 7.
I think Christie's getting in this just to attack Trump.
I think the more the competition, the better we can see who Donald Trump really is.
Iowa's the place that we shape principled conservative leadership. Iowa's the place that shaped the standard bearer of this party.
Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Well, the 2024 GOP presidential field is expanding rapidly, with multiple Republicans jumping into the race just this week. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is now officially a presidential candidate. He filed paperwork declaring a run with the Federal Election Commission earlier today. Christie is also announcing his candidacy in New Hampshire tonight. And former Vice President Mike Pence is expected to kick off his campaign in Iowa tomorrow, while North Dakota Governor Doug Burgums is also set to announce a run. To discuss Pence's 2024 bid, CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us now from Iowa. Hi, Bob.
Good to be with you, Nancy.
So this is something that Mike Pence has obviously been mulling for some time. What do your sources tell you were the main reasons that he ultimately did decide to get into the race?
For former Vice President Mike Pence, this presidential candidacy is not just about a personal comeback over his searing experience on January 6, 2021, and his role in certifying the 2020 election, which caused him such consternation, generated ire among former President Trump supporters. This is also about an attempted political comeback for his brand of American conservatism, that traditional Republican political playbook used by former President Ronald Reagan, Newt Gingrich in 1994, and by Pence during his congressional career in the House of Representatives. There's a belief inside of Pence's inner circle the Republican Party could want to move back in that direction, away from the populism and grievance of the Trump era.
What do they think, Bob, is the realistic path for Mike Pence to the nomination? Obviously, he would want to go after fans of the Trump-Pence presidency, and yet ostensibly Mr. Trump would still appear to have most of those voters locked up. And he's been making the case loudly ever since he lost that part of the reason he lost is that Mike Pence wouldn't do what he wanted Pence to do on January 6th.
If the Pence strategy comes down to anything, Nancy, it would be two of the letters on the bottom of the screen just there, IA, Iowa. His whole play is about Iowa. If you want to understand the Pence campaign, based on our reporting, you have to look back to history to understand Mike Huckabee's 2008 Republican presidential campaign, Rick Santorum's Republican presidential campaign in 2012. This was about putting a focus on Iowa and hoping to jolt in this state in the caucuses, whether it's a victory or a near victory, puts them on the map politically in the nominating contest and elevates them toward those Super Tuesday contests later in the cycle. So Pence knows he's not going to have the money. He's not going to have the same profile as Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. But he also believes, I'm told, that Trump and DeSantis might end up taking each other out politically, going after each other with political warfare day in, day out. And if that occurs as a dynamic in the Republican race, Pence and others are hoping they can carve out their own space and be positioned to win over conservative voters should Trump or DeSantis ever be hobbled politically.
So what are you expecting to hear from him in Iowa tomorrow? Do you think he's going to be making an overt play for evangelical voters?
He is certainly going to be pitching evangelical voters. He's also going to talk about his Midwestern roots. He's one of the only people running for president who has Midwestern roots, so he's going to try to connect his growing up in Indiana, his boyhood in the Hoosier State, with what it's like to have life here in Iowa, the Hawkeye State. You can expect him to talk about agriculture, talk about his faith, and he believes there's enough of a faith contingent in Iowa, in the Republican Party, to give him a block of voters that could make him very competitive, especially if he can find a way to build together that Huckabee-Santorum, Ted Cruz-type coalition from previous years and add in some of the Trump voters slowly but surely.
Bob, Mike Pence is so careful about when he does and doesn't criticize the former president. Do you think that the fact that someone like Christie, who isn't careful at all about when he goes after the former president, do you think the fact that Christie's getting into the race makes it easier in some ways for Pence to seek distance from former President Donald Trump?
What you're seeing from Pence is what you're somewhat seeing from DeSantis, which is a contrast on policy. Pence has come after Trump's positions on long-term federal spending programs like Medicare and Social Security. He has argued that Trump is not conservative enough on some of these policy issues, including on abortion. Pence has a more conservative position on abortion when it comes to the details of that policy position. And so you see in Pence someone who's saying that he can come at Trump from the right. DeSantis is doing the same. And when you talk to Trump allies, they believe that's where Trump could have some vulnerability. They don't believe Republican voters are ever going to pull away from Trump on character issues or questions about his conduct. That's never proven to be an effective way to come at Trump. But coming at Trump from the right raises issues about his record. DeSantis has been going after Trump on how Trump handled the pandemic, how he interacted with Dr. Anthony Fauci. And you see Pence saying that Trump's record on the economy, on fiscal issues, is just not right-wing enough.
Robert Costa in Iowa, thank you.
Thank you.
To discuss Christie's bid, CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now. Hi, Caitlin.
Hey, Nancy, good to be with you.
Good to see you. So walk us through Christie's theory of the case. Why is he running for a second time, and why does he believe that he'll do better this time than he did in 2016?
Well, Nancy, Christie is trying to carve out a space in this really crowded field that's growing by the day as the toughest Trump critic in the race. And it's a notable transition for Christie because, as you remember, in 2016, he campaigned in Iowa and especially here in New Hampshire. He came in 6th in New Hampshire, dropped out, ended up endorsing Donald Trump and being a key ally and defender of his. He helped prep him for debates in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, and then for a time he led his transition team to the White House. But he said he soured on Donald Trump after the 2020 election, in which Donald Trump made false claims about the election being stolen. And he said he got off the train at that point. So the big question now is whether there are enough voters in places like New Hampshire and elsewhere that are also willing to get off that train with Christie. He's hoping to really base his campaign here in New Hampshire, where voters in the primary are a little more independent-minded. And he's betting that there is some willingness to move on from the former president. The challenge, however, is that there are a lot of others that are competing for those voters as well. And when you look at the polling and when you talk to Republican voters, it's not necessarily that they want to hear a lot of fighting with Donald Trump. They want to hear kind of how you can turn the page, but also they seem to show support for his policies.
But that is one of the things that sets Christie apart from these other Republican candidates, right? It's the fact that he isn't afraid to go directly after the former president. Does his entrance into the race mean that some of these other candidates like Mike Pence or Nikki Haley or even Tim Scott might feel more comfortable? Does it create a permission structure for them to go after former President Trump as well?
It'll be a really interesting test case of that, Nancy, for sure, or whether it could allow them to kind of move forward and let Christie be the one waging these attacks against the former president. The biggest test of all of this will be on the debate stage in August. That's going to be a challenge for Christie. You have to have a certain amount of donors, be polling in the polls at a certain threshold, and you also have to sign a loyalty pledge to support the eventual nominee. Neither Christie or Donald Trump, for that matter, have said whether they will support it. But Christie has said that the debate stage is kind of where he can make his case against the former president.
Another challenge for Christie is that he stood by the former president right up until he lost and said goodbye. And now, of course, he's a fierce critic. Caitlin Huey-Burns in New Hampshire, thanks so much. Well, with Chris Christie making his presidential announcement in New Hampshire, we're going to talk to one of the state's longtime GOP voices about how the race is shaping up in the first-in-the-nation primary state. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News. An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Prime Time with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. As we reported, the 2024 Republican field for president continues to grow. One person not entering the race is New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. For more on the GOP fight for the pivotal Granite State, Jennifer Horn joins us now. She is a senior fellow at the University of Chicago and previously served as the chair of New Hampshire's Republican Party. Jennifer, welcome. Thanks for being with us. Your state is at the center of the political world this week with Chris Christie announcing his candidacy there. He placed sixth, though, in 2016 in New Hampshire, and then he dropped out shortly thereafter. So is there any sign that this time will be different?
Well, and any election that includes Donald Trump is just so unpredictable. You just can't compare it to any kind of traditional race, So normally you might look at it and say, well, this, Chris Christie has run before, and the folks in New Hampshire, chose not to elect him, chose not to, choose him up near the top of the list. So, how is this time different? Well, what's different this time is January 6th, federal indictments potentially, all sorts of corruption and perfect phone calls that weren't so perfect. There's a lot about this cycle that's different and unique again, just like every other time Trump is involved in a race. So what I think that Governor Christie has going in his favor in New Hampshire is that he has had an entire statewide operation there in the past. They aren't all going to come out and say we're with Chris Christie on day one. We see that he's polling at 1% right now. But some of those folks who were with him back in 2016 will be with him again, and he'll have something he can build on at least.
Does the fact that New Hampshire's governor revealed yesterday that he is not going to run clear the way for someone like Chris Christie? And why do you think that Chris Sununu ultimately decided not to run when everyone else seems to be making the opposite choice?
Well, I think that Governor Sununu made a smart choice here. He talked about wanting there to be a kind of a clear path to be able to defeat Donald Trump. And what we saw in 2016, what really gave Trump the advantage at that time was less, his personality and his, bombastic nature, and more the fact that there were 16 or 17 people in the race. He was able to win several states with about 30% of the vote. So the more the more crowded the race is, the more that's an advantage for Donald Trump. And I think that Governor Sununu understood that, and that, he doesn't want to see Donald Trump become the nominee. And so, for somebody like Chris Christie, though, he's kind of in a unique position, can sort of create his own lane. We have all these candidates who are afraid to talk against Donald Trump, to stand up to him, to really, be aggressive and assertive. And then we've got this one candidate, DeSantis, who is trying to be Donald Trump. So there kind of might be a lane there for someone like Chris Christie, who's aggressive and assertive and unafraid to attack Donald Trump, head on, and kind of see where it takes you. I'm not suggesting I think that Christie's going to be the nominee, but I think that he's compared to all the other candidates, he's in kind of a unique position. So it will be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Is Sununu's decision a sign that moderates are starting to conclude that Donald Trump is essentially unbeatable? And what do you think that his decision is going to mean for someone like a Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, who's still mulling a late entrance into the race?
Well, the polls would certainly suggest that Republican primary voters, don't have any interest in a moderate or a reasonable voice. Or, look at Nikki Haley and Tim Scott. They're both trying to be positive and upbeat and, bring a more, a more positive outlook to their campaign messaging. And they're both stuck in single digits as well. When you have a candidate like Donald Trump polling nationally over 50%, it's not enough to say, hey, I think I could be a good president. You have to be willing to really fight and say why this other guy is not. As long as the candidates are afraid to confront Trump, he's the guy. It's going to go to him no matter what.
Right. And yet New Hampshire is in such a unique position because it's the first in the nation state primary for Republicans. And Chris Sununu, while he is moderate, he's quite popular in New Hampshire. Right. So what kind of weight would his endorsement have in that pivotal state? And who do you think he might back?
He's very influential with Republican voters in the state of New Hampshire. There's no question about that. And his endorsement will be very valuable. I wouldn't dream of trying to guess what his plans are for the future. And frankly, he may not have a thought yet about who he would endorse. Republicans like Chris are in kind of a tough situation. You never want to endorse somebody that isn't going to win strategically. On the other hand, he's certainly not going to endorse Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. So, or at least I wouldn't think that he would endorse Ron DeSantis. He's just not enough different from Trump. Normally, I would expect him to endorse somebody like a Tim Scott or a Nikki Haley. I'm not sure, what he'll do though in this cycle. It's all very unusual again.
It is quite unusual. You talked about how Christie is so much more comfortable than a lot of the other GOP candidates when it comes to going after former President Donald Trump.
Right.
Most of them are choosing instead to go after the current president, Joe Biden. Let's take a listen.
Right.
Our leaders are failing us, and no one embodies that failure more than Joe Biden.
Our nation, our values, and our people are strong, but our president is weak.
Our great American comeback starts by sending Joe Biden back to his basement in Delaware.
Jennifer, do you think that GOP voters are ultimately going to be judging these candidates based on how hard they're willing to go after Joe Biden?
No, I really don't. I mean, primary voters always want to know that you're able to go after your opponent. And of course, Republican primary voters want to hear you beat up the Democrats and the other way around as well. But again, in order to get there, you've got to defeat the guy who's got the 20 or 30 point lead in the primary race. So I'm certain that primary voters love to hear this rhetoric from their candidates. However, it's not enough right now to just go after Joe Biden. That's assumed that you're going to be against Joe Biden. What they need to hear are these candidates going after Donald Trump. And if they can't make a mark on Trump, then they're never going to get the chance to make a mark against Joe Biden.
And that'll be an especially interesting dilemma for someone like Mike Pence, his former running mate, who is expected to get into the race in Iowa tomorrow. Jennifer Horn, the former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Kyiv and Moscow are blaming each other after a key dam collapsed in southern Ukraine. Next, we're going to take you to the White House for the White House reaction. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much. God bless you and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job?
I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
On a recent trip to a U.S. training post in a free Germany, I met brave young men and women from Ukraine who were learning how to fight for their lives and for their country. And today, I am more determined than ever to stand by them for as long as it takes.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Normandy, France, commemorating the 79th anniversary of D-Day. He connected the fight for freedom then to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Kyiv and Moscow are trading blame for an attack on a key dam in Russian-occupied southern Ukraine. Here was National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby on the matter.
We've been closely monitoring the impacts of that destruction, which has triggered massive flooding in Ukraine and resulted in the evacuation of, at the very least, thousands of Ukrainians. We know there are casualties, including likely many deaths.
CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now. Hi, Ed. So what is the White House saying about who was responsible for the attack on this dam?
They're not saying much yet, Nancy, as they continue to assess whether or not it was the Russians who blew up a dam that they've taken control of, or whether it was the Ukrainians, as the Russians allege. Although notably, Ukrainian leaders today had pointed out that the way the dam blew up would have required explosions from within the structure itself, or to have had total control of it, which the Ukrainians do not. Not being intimately familiar with the design of it, that seems like a compelling argument. But the White House, so far at least, not taking a stand on this. They've been notably cautious in what they say about what's going on over there right now. They were asked to describe the ongoing Ukrainian military operations yesterday and refused to say that it is the counteroffensive, although CBS News has heard from U.S. officials, or David Martin at the Pentagon had said that the best way to characterize this now is that they're in the beginnings of that counteroffensive, which is what makes this explosion at the dam and the subsequent flooding so troublesome, because it's going to have a broader humanitarian effect now that the region has been worried about for the last several weeks.
Ed, lots of foreign news today. You also asked about the PGA Tour and Live Golf merger. Does the White House have any comment on this very controversial merger?
Notably, they did not, Nancy. And, you know, we should point out that the conversation we had with them, our daily briefing, was occurring right around the same time the Secretary of State was arriving in Saudi Arabia for a trip that's expected to include time with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. So it may have had to do with that they just simply didn't want to be engaging on a sensitive matter regarding Saudi Arabia when they know the top diplomat is supposed to be meeting with senior Saudi leadership. And the timing of this was just so tricky in that regard. We'll see in the coming days whether or not the White House or the Justice Department has something to say about any potential antitrust concerns or dealings with foreign agents. Certainly there are lawmakers today, notably Democrats, who said that, yes, this is something that should be up for review, at least to make sure that the PGA isn't violating some kind of law or antitrust provision that sports leagues enjoy. Remember, they're all nonprofits and have been allowed to operate, but under congressional oversight. And so we'll see in the coming days if this becomes a bigger political issue. Certainly, of course, all issues regarding Saudi Arabia have been in recent years because of its human rights record, the death of the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, and other concerns about its human rights record. So I tell you, though, it is a story that has permeated across Washington, across society, as word broke today of this coming up. So inevitably, the White House is going to have something to say about it.
Such a good point, though, that they might want to tread lightly while the Secretary of State is meeting with Saudi officials. On a totally different topic, Ed, such a busy week for the Republican field for 2024. You've got several GOP candidates jumping into the race just this week. What's the latest On President Biden's bid for re-election, things have been noticeably quiet on that front lately.
And it will continue to be that way through much of the rest of this calendar year, according to those that are helping put the campaign together. They point to what Barack Obama was doing back in 2011, mostly raising money, tacking on political events to official travel. We expect the president to pick that up again now that the debt limit fight is over and he's been occupied here in Washington. Expect to hear about fundraising swings later this month into July, probably a handful in August as well, as they try to pad their coffers and raise as much money himself or the vice president or the first lady, and especially the second gentleman as this gets underway. A former donor himself is expected to be quite active on the fundraising circuit. Otherwise, the campaign itself, the Democratic National Committee, sit back, watch, and continue to just fill the research packets on each of these Republican contenders. They've pointed out to us for much of the last year that they've been tracking about 24 potential Republican presidential hopefuls. Christie, Pence, and even the North Dakota governor, Doug Burgum, who's getting in this week, have all been on that list, and they remain poised and prepared for whoever ultimately emerges, though obviously Democrats would prefer to see a rematch with former President Trump because they continue to believe that's when they can win. Right, and there's this theory of the case that it's not such a bad thing for the Biden campaign to lay low, let the Republicans duke it out in the public eye for now. Ed O'Keefe, thanks so much for bringing your insight today. Take care. And that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You've been streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder. The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go